Nellie Bly, a person who traveled the world, prevented innocent people from farther torture, and reported on World War I from the front lines. This person did this even though she couldn't even vote and all odds were against her as a woman. It all started one day in May 1887 when Nellie arrived in New York by train in her flowered hat. She was a young, determined woman at the age of 23 who was fully dependent on herself for the first time in her life. New York at the time was a city of murder, robberies, and disease. The streets were not at all a safe place. Above all its disadvantages, it was the ideal place to make her one dream come true: journalism. Women in that day were incredibly rare to make an appearance in the newsroom. In fact, Mr. Coates of the Mail and Express described women as invaluable. After doing much persuading and being turned down by many newspapers, Nellie found herself in front of the World's imposing editor-in-chief. The World was known to be the most successful newspaper in the United States. The editor, Colonel John Cockrell, was the one who saw a spark in Nellie. He was the one who hired her. Colonial John soon gave her the assignment that not only influenced her life, but many others around her. She was to pretend to be mentally ill to report on Blackwell's insane asylum. In order to do this, she needed to be admitted. First, she rented a room at Temporary Home for Females, which is a boarding house. After doing much practicing in front of a mirror, she perfected a stare that made her look insane. At the boarding house, Nellie convinced everyone that she was crazy, and at the end of the day, no one wanted to sleep in the same room with fear of being murdered. Everyone except for a compassionate woman, Mrs. Kane, who offered to share a room. After ranting about her missing trunks, a woman suggested to call the police about her strange ways. This was good news for Nellie. Nellie Bly pretended not to know who she was or where she came from, and no one else knew either at the Market Police Court. A policeman finally suggested, "Send her to the island." Judge Duffy then escorted her to his private chambers for further questions. Somehow here, she was able to convince him that she was from Cuba by using Spanish she had learned a while back. He was tested by another expert that she was easily able to fool. Nellie stayed at a hospital to be further examined by doctors and was soon declared as positively demented. She was in. Blackwell Island was a place that had charitable institutions that were horribly abused, and even though it was a hospital, it was much more of a cold, dark prison. In this hospital, Nellie would soon meet women who were absolutely sane, like a cook named Margaret, who was here because she let her temper run away with her. Another German young woman said that her husband had thrown her in the asylum because she had other fondness than men than himself. Nellie Bly had every intention of acting sane once she got on the island to get out as soon as possible after getting enough information, but it did not work out that way. Every time she tried to talk to the nurses or doctors, they told her to shut up. Nellie Bly quoted, "Yet strange to say, the more sanely I talked, I acted crazier than I was thought to be." One night, they threatened her until she swallowed a pill that had morphine and chloral in it that made patients crazier and pleading for water. As soon as the nurse left, she pried it back up with her finger. The inmates at this hospital were forced to take freezing cold baths weekly. Nellie was dunked under water, roughly scrubbed with soap, and then dragged out of the bath. Bly later states, "I think I experienced some of the sensations of a drowning person as they dragged me, gasping and shivering and quaking from the tub. For once I did look insane." During her stay, she talked to a few of the patients and learned that they had been beaten by the nurses for no reason and sometimes just for fun. The worst part of the day, she claims, was the sitting hall. They were to sit on hard benches for hours at a time with no way to entertain themselves or stretch. After 10 days in this horrifying place, she was set free by a lawyer who said friends of hers would take care of her in the city. Once they got news out in the newspapers about the treatment of the patients, Nellie Bly and investigators came to investigate the island. The asylum had drastically changed due to an attempted cover-up. The boat was clean, the food was much less dangerous, the nurses were very kind, and the beds were far more comfortable. The sane patients were discharged or hidden. The grand jury decided to add more money to the charitable program to increase quality of the institution. After this, Nellie became extremely famous. She was to publish the book 10 Days in a Madhouse. You may have heard the novel Around the World in 80 Days, but did you know that she traveled the world in 72 days? She organized a trip of a lifetime and was confident she could beat the record, and she did, even while another woman, Elizabeth Bislin, tried to outpace her without her knowing. Nellie Bly traveled by ship to England, then to Italy by train, sailed to Egypt, went to Malaysia, sailed to Hong Kong, traveled to China, then Japan, then back to New York on January 21st. Another main assignment that Nellie accomplished was reporting on the front lines in World War I. The conditions were harsh. There were trenches dug for her protection that turned slicker than ice. She watched as men died in their half-dug graves, mostly from exposure. Nellie watched a man die before her eyes in a Red Cross hospital, staring at her with black, hollow eyes and begging for his children. She returned to New York in February to live with her mother. In 1920, she was diagnosed with bronchitis and ignored all the advice and medicine the doctor gave her. On January 27, 1922, at the age of 57, Nellie Bly died of pneumonia. The New York Times declared her as the best reporter in the world. And she was. Nellie Bly showed everyone that anything is possible if you never give up. Nellie Bly went from being penniless and jobless to being one of the most famous women in America at the time. She proved to be very brave and was not afraid of anything. She made a mark on this world that will stay forever.